probably see that new approach. As we hop into the second game of this series between Mr. and Leenock, take to the classic one we usually begin with in Dry Arabia.
Indeed, we're hopping into Dry Arabia over here. In the color blue, it is going to be Leenock playing as the Holy Roman Empire in blue, and Mista is going to be utilizing the red French over here. And once again, fitting German language over here when we have the HRE involved. I mean, we could say it's intentional and we just want to increase immersion.
Yeah, we're doing it for immersion right now. Even if you like, this is a bit close. Like it's a fair median ground, maybe, because the HRE they span, the German kingdoms and the French, the Franks. Okay, I'm reaching when I try to involve the French in it, but the neighbors, it kind of counts. I mean, it would have been weirder if we went with English, Lidakor, because technically, like the English, they're not neighbors of anyone. They live on their own island.
I think, like, as I said, we can just say this was intentional and you are lucky that we're not seeing the Chinese being used in either of these games. Otherwise, it would be
fun. I've
been
meaning to do a course in Chinese. That would be much cheaper. Just watch the EGC channel. There you go, folks. Like, not only are we an entertainment channel and also a way for you to see the hypest esports, we're now an educational channel as well. Learn your languages here.
Indeed. So today, Gold Adder is going to be the German word for the gold mine. Repeat after me. Gold Adder.
Gold Adder.
Perfect. Thank you.
Danke.
All right.
That doesn't mean what it sounds like it means in English, folks. That means thanks.
All right, so enough of educational content. In the meantime, big shout out to the Muslim coming in with the raid before. Thank you so much, and welcome everybody from your stream. We also need to add the score over here. Don't get deceived. This is game number 2. It is Leenock leading 1-0, and he's at match point in this best of 3.
He is, and it was quite cruise mode for him. Mista. That's kind of the funny thing, right? Leenock was just playing standard Age of Empires 4, and when I say standard, I don't mean like, oh, it was average. No, he was just playing like the meta, the way you'd expect people to play. And for him, it wasn't about doing something right as much as it was a Mista like doing something that could go wrong. And that's not to say Leenock didn't hold off well, but you get what I mean, right? Like he's playing the standardized form of scalability, while Mista has just proven that he's willing to go all in. And I'm excited to see if Leenock is going to try to educate him on how to make this strategy work, or if we're going to get a safer variety of the HRE.
Now, looking at Mista's base, he's desperately low on sheep. You could see that underneath the town center, there was basically no sheep left for him, and he's moving out for berries already. That could be a source of concern for a French player out here, because if Mista doesn't have a ton of sheep, it also means that Leenock has most of them. Looks like he's just now bringing back a couple, so it's not as bad as it looked initially, but still, not a ton of sheep for him. So if Leenock was able to snag like 10, 15 sheep for himself over here, that's gonna be a very nice food eco with the Aachen Chapel boosting it.
I don't know about you, but I want to learn how to say trade in German, so if we could just click on a sheep carcass. I still can't get over this. I will never get over the fact that for some reason
you're putting the core into a tough spot. Like,
he's like, he's like, I want to get rehired. Yeah, there it is. The queue on the queue. Highlight the queue. No, oh, okay.
There we go.
Panicking.
Oh yeah, putting a new observer into a tough spot, right?
Okay, cool. You see your hotkeys. Hover on Q. You see where the trade symbol is on the. As in your hot... No. How do I communicate what I just said in German? He's not following through with me. All right, we'll move on. We'll focus on the game, because we got pretty good Aachen Chapel actually coming out from Leenock. A lot of wood covered, as well as the gold and the sheep, plus a lot of area behind his TC where he can build up into farm. So I think this is a very nice spawn for Leenock, and the way he's utilized it with this chapel.
Yeah, I agree on this one. And this is... probably the best thing that you can get over here. It's also going to get very close to that mill that you mentioned before, so his farming eco is gonna be set up well. And you see that Mista, he does have the sheep to work with, but he's still taking some of the berries. Not exactly sure what the mindset behind is, because obviously that's going to give you a slightly lower getter rate, but I guess it extends the time frame in which you have access to those sheep, and probably he's like, okay, my berries could be contested in the next few minutes, so I want to take them before that happens.
I'm wondering, like, how many people on the berries actually? Because, like, maybe he felt he missed his timing to get wheelbarrow fast enough, so he pulled additional villagers to build a mill. That sounds pretty bonkers, but Considering, like, if I said that sounds bonkers, but then I told you someone was going to rush Burgrave, spam man at arms, and stop building villages at 30 in a top 8 situation on the road to Wololo, would pulling more people to build a mill sound more bonkers than that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It looks like we do have a deleted building over here for Leenock. He's placing his barracks and stable at the back. He's trying to conceal this. This is something that players actually started to do a lot more. You also have Core highlighting us that it would have been in the influence radius of the Akenchapon. You probably want to save that space for farms. But he's still placing it at the back because normally you expect your opponent to have the production buildings on the front so they can reinforce the battlefield a little sooner. So if you place it at the back, you're essentially trying to conceal it away from the opponent. But Mista, he can't be fooled. He's going to scout it. And it looks like we're going to have what seems to be Spearman Horseman over here. Quite a lot of aggression could come out of Leenock over here.
Yeah, I quite like it. I think there's something that's underutilized with the HRE because we've seen how powerful they can be once they boom up into castle and they rush you with Burgrave. But let's be real about this. A lot of the tools that they're utilizing there are available earlier. You can get marching drills at this point in the game. You can get your hands on men at arms at this point in the game. And also your economy. Like, if you're utilizing it for aggression this early, like, it's an efficiency logic here that if you're 40% more efficient at this stage of the game, like, with a very condensed quantity of villages, you're going to lose some value as the game goes on, as your opponent builds more TCs, as they get their own economical benefits coming online. So finding a way of leveraging the HRE's biggest power in the early game, which is the gathering rates, via early aggression, is something I'm always a fan of.
Yeah, and this is the single most vulnerable period for the HRE. So once you get to Castle Age, once you get to Imperial, HRE just unlocks so many things that are just essential for gameplay. So if Leenock can survive this next few minutes, that has to make him very satisfied because he's going to get through the worst period of HRE, that is their feudal age, because this is where probably they're most exposed at. Now, it looks like the villagers underneath the town center are out of sheep, and given the fact that we do have some knights roaming around here for Mista, it might be a little difficult for Leenock to access food, and it looks like he didn't even notice it yet, which is, I guess, the bigger concern.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough. He's trying to get into those farms. Of course, they're very pricey, and the woodline's what you have to expose now. Mister knows that you are switching farms, and this is a very odd thing to see an HRE play do this early on in the game, unless they're drying up real fast. And the problem he now has is you're an HRE player that's kind of been exposed in the middle of the farmland transition. You are going to start getting blocked on your woodline unless you outpost up, and even then the dives will come out. And you can't go for the alternative option, which is to play over into the deer stacks, into the berry stacks, because if you build pocket ecos, you're going to need ample outposts as you are up against French Knights.
Indeed. Now it looks like Castle Age is coming in here for Leenock. In the meantime, Mista is playing 2 town centers over here, so his eco is gonna look pretty good. But looking at the relic spots, those look fairly well distributed. Leenock should have no issues getting 2 relics for himself here.
Yeah, they are. Like, that back one, definitely. I think anything else is going to be very hard to fight for. Mister's already pumping out spears as well as knights, and he understands what's coming, and he's already insulated himself when he went for the very early secondary TC. This is a pretty cool play, the way he done this. He delayed his early aggression because it's almost impossible to stop an HRE player from getting castle unless you block the gold straight away. And Mister wasn't willing to gamble that he could block the gold because, A, that's like an RNG move. You don't know if your opponent's gold is forward of their TC or behind at the beginning. And B, well, you're not the Mongols or the English, so the likelihood of you running out and building an outpost next to this is somewhat lower.
Indeed it is. Looks like first relic is now coming in here for Leenock. So how do you feel about this one going forward? Leenock is going to have himself set up with probably 2, potentially 3 relics. And in the meantime, Mista is in feudal age with not a lot of army out there to show for himself. At least it's the Ragnitz Cathedral and not the Burgrave Palace, so you won't be flooded by infantry, but you see, Mista, he is going for what will be a very spearman-focused approach over here. He's expecting knights from the enemy, but we could see Leenock arriving with men-at-arms, or just his own spearman here, actually, instead of just going for knights.
And it looks like Mister's doing the Holy Trinity, right? He's going for the archery range, I believe that was, the Speerstand in his own base, so it looks like he's going to try to like make sure he's got all angles covered. Interesting choice if it is an archery range, because although you do see spears, you are admittedly up against an HRE player, and any reason to build man-at-arms is a reason they will take. And if they see archers in the field, they don't come much better than that.
Indeed, and right now there is not a single archer on the battlefield, luckily for Mista, and Behind this, he's actually being pretty active with those knights, way more active than we thought initially.
Oh,
That's
wow.
quite a lot of villagers from Leenock, and remember, he's very constrained on food. He didn't go professional scouts, which is something that you sometimes see from the HRE. So his food eco is almost a train wreck here, only has a handful of farms, and the other source of food he can access is just the berries.
Well, you can't go to pro scouts to the tough part, right? Because you're up against the French,
Yep,
and they
that's a
push
tough
early Royal
part.
Knights. So it's kind of one of those annoying situations where you accept you're going to be very oppressed, and Leenock is handling the aggression reasonably well. Like his eco situation is a bit depressing to look at. If you hit the civs, you'd be like GG, but it is the HRE. He is getting a second relic as well, and there are catch-up elements to this. And now that he's arrived at the point where he can start pushing knights, he can somewhat combat back against this. And right now, Mr. only has 3 knights in the field. He's gone hard in the spears, and the cool thing is, although spears do counter these knights, you can dodge them. You can just walk away. That is an element of gameplay available to you because your unit does move faster.
Indeed, it looks like a Prelate gets picked off on the right side over here. That is going to slow down Leenock gathering the relics over here. On a side note, we do have to discuss one of the factors if we haven't talked about yet, that is the civilizations, the mind games behind this one. Mongols was the civilization banned by both players out there, but Mista, he's the type of player that likes to pop out something like the English, for example, in Arabia. So, as you pointed out, part of the reason why Leenock is constrained on food is because he couldn't go pro scouts with the HRE because his opponent is French. But maybe he picked the HRE expecting a different civilization here from Mista, maybe English. And we're just seeing, these big mind games showing up on the battlefield for us here when it comes to the civilization selections.
It's an interesting thought because I think the English come with their own challenges, the HRE, but it is a little bit RNG dependent. What I mean by that is if an English player can grab your gold early on, if they can outpost it up or man at arms rush it, like once again, the HRE is a civ that doesn't tend to do anything. They can't do anything. They're very hard stuck. It's exactly like why I'm a little bit worried about what the English can do in the coming weeks as players get used to and to grips with further with that man arms rush. If the map's starting getting predictable, and this, by the way, like just to like shill our due process of like custom maps and how we look at them. This is why we're very kind of picky on the way that things spawn, because if we do get very predictable maps, you are going to see these very cheesy strats, and I think the English is a civ that can do that. And I've even as recently as like 2 or 3 days ago seen plenty of high level players that are still doing those boy arm strats.
Yeah, like as you pointed out, unpredictability is a key factor in Age of Empires when it comes to the map spawns, simply because that encourages and incentivizes scouting as well, and it also incentivizes you to, adjust your strategy based on the map that spawns, instead of just, in quotation marks, mindlessly going for an all-in strat because you know where a certain resource deposit spawns, and you can just go all in it because you know it's gonna be there always.
And I think the Mongol ban makes a lot of sense when you think about what these two players have been doing. So Leenock, we didn't get to like present him on the stream much recently, but he does play a lot of Mongols. He's actually infuriating to deal with. He's one of the most consistent players at successfully blocking people's gold out when he plays Mongol. And that allows him to just cruise on into his castle age vastly ahead of them. Now, that's one explained. What about the other? Well, I think you'd like to talk a little bit about this other one, Lidakor, because we saw something quite miraculous out of Mr. via his Mongols yesterday involving a boar.
Yeah, like, that was a crazy, crazy build from Mista. Obviously, a lot of things lined up well for that, but I said this for a long, long time, especially before Mista left for, farming season. Mista, before he left, was probably the single most powerful and dangerous Mongol player out there. He loves the diversity of the civilization. I think he still has one of the most efficient fast castle builds with the Mongols, and he's just a very dangerous player overall with that. Now, many players have caught up and like, oh, just, as Core is showing us, Mista, he also loves his eco, not just his Mongols. Third tower center being added here, he's facing so little pressure that he realizes that, wait, I can get a little greedier with this, and as you referred to it, yesterday he went on a board with the Mongols. He is a player that loves to play greedy, and he knows when to get away with it. And you see he's also towering that force of food out there. He's got his guild hall set on food as well, because he's also constrained a tiny bit on that specific resource.
Hold on a sec there, Lidakor. What was that? He says he's got 3 what? Did you call them?
Town centers, but I know that our game right now is...
Whoa. No, yeah, they're
Dorfzentrums. There we go.
Yeah.
I just want to highlight that I knew that before Core clicked on it. Okay, shout out to Nilly's German Day streams, where he streams like If you are familiar with Nili, he does his streams in English, except for Mondays when he's streaming in German. And he actually changes the language of the game for German Mondays to German. So I actually got to learn a couple of German words, mostly from Age of Empires 2, but I mean, Town Center is Town Center in both games. So you can actually get some language lessons there as well if you are, trying to increase your knowledge of vocabulary when it comes to Age of Empires specific words in German.
I'd like to know what language is being said by these players. Look, we could probably predict when they're getting raided on their ecos like this. It looks like Leenock's going to be able to block this one out and take control on the west side. He had, of course, walled up that area. The raids are starting to come in towards Mista's direction, but the thing is he doesn't care. Look at the difference in villager count right now between these two players. It's almost double up in favor of the French. And the crazy part is, like, Leenock, he's still playing for that Imperial timing, but by the time he arrives there, although he might get an opportunity to recover his own economy with the Love Hotel, I feel like Mista's going to end up being pop capped by that point, so he won't care.
Yeah, and it's the timing effect of this. Like, the moment you see Leenock going into Imperial, you know that you're on a bit of a timer, and you see that the last 1 or 2 minutes, Mista has been popping out army after army, and also all the key upgrades. So Gambesons came in for him. He now has good production set up, like 3-4 archer ranges, multiple barracks for Spearman Arbaletier, and you see Mista's also gathering stone. This is that time frame where you can even consider just going for a timing push, maybe even an aggressive castle. It's a little risky, obviously, because you do have to keep in mind that even if you go for an aggressive castle, Leenock has access to bombards. But a timing push here is a reality for Mista once he sees that Leenock has gotten his Imperial Age in.
Yeah, and it looks like he actually might line up quite nicely. Leenock is underway. Mista about to hit 140 pop cap, does need to fix that soon. And he is just absorbing all the mid-map, at least on the food in a lot of ways. But the gold is going to be the focus as we move forward. Of course, Leenock does have infinitesimal gold, it feels like, when you play with Reignets. But that's going to be an important detail for Mista. Like, we've seen what happens in Dry Arabia. It becomes a race for gold and then switches back to wood. And it's kind of crazy to think for such an open map, it's so common these days for us to see it turn into like an hour-long slog where nobody can make any real progress.
Yeah, indeed. It could easily turn out to be an hour-long slog, because if you look at those forest spawns as well, they line up so well when it comes to just making walls in between them. And indeed, as you see, both of the players playing this one a little more cautiously. Leenock, of course, he's just fine going into Imperial here, because that's where his real power spike comes in with the Palace of Schwabia. Whereas for Mista, he's up against a player with match points, so he obviously approaches this cautiously, making sure he doesn't make any key mistakes. Now he's marching up with the infantry, but what can he accomplish with these units without any kind of supporting siege?
And how do they not just die instantly to Leenock's composition? Look what he's building. It's primarily spears and lance necks, which don't care about what Mista has, right? Spears and Arbaletiers don't get their bonus damage against either of those. And folks, if you're playing HRE at this stage in the game, top tip, upgrade both these units to elite status, because they both wear beautiful yellow pants and it's very hard to differentiate between them. At a glance, it's not easy to keep track of how much that giant death ball is actually cleave damage and how much of it is just cannon fodder.
If only one of those units had like a 5-meter long stick in his hand. But yeah, you're right about that one. It's a little difficult to distinguish between the two. And you always want to mix in some spearmen to your force of Landsknechte, because if you have just Landsknechte, they're fairly fragile. But when you have spears, it's a very cheap throwaway unit that you can use as a meat shield to absorb damage. And it's much more difficult to focus down those Landsknechte in the middle of the formation. Fun fact, it's probably the only unit that has the same name in the game in both the English and the German version of the game.
Like how we just keep having to like emphasize the German version of the game now. Oh god. We might just keep it. Like at first it looks like a bug to the production, but I think it's an improvement. I think we're just amplifying the experience. It wasn't enough that we changed the starting map in these series, Lidakor. We needed to change the language as well. All right, looking at the same thing day in day out, people are gonna get bored of that. We're just keeping them. Wait. No, I'm not gonna let that go. Look at Leenock's gold line. It's shaming time right now. I see some 7 dwarves hi-hoing back and forth a mile to their house here. What were they doing running back? Nah, he didn't have that built at first. I saw them walk to that mining camp.
I'm gonna believe you. I trust you. So I'm gonna believe you on that one. But luckily now he has that mining camp up. And it looks like we're gonna have a bit more expansion over here from Mista. And as you said, it's going to be, front lines solidifying over here. It's that traditional Maginot line set up with the French, and honestly, French versus HRE, that's also fitting civilizations-wise.
It's definitely in the right place. Let's just see if Leenock will be able to discover some lowlands that he can just walk into and around the Maginot Line. Because, in fairness, although there are reasonable defenses up, the concern I have for Mista is with his current composition, you can't really react on two fronts. And even something as small as marching drills can allow a little bit more fluidity to Leenock to strike in multiple locations at once and maybe just be ahead of Mista. But that's why Mista's moving in. Like, if he can shrink this quick enough, if he can stay right on top of Leenock, moving left to right, the distance is shortened when your opponent has less of the map under his control.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what Leenock is actually doing over here, because you see he banked up 3,000 food. He's at 80 villagers. As you pointed out, by the time he reaches the required amount of villagers or the desired amount of villagers, Mista's gotta be pop capped. And you see, Mista's going into Imperial here. I feel like there might be a window that could be actually closing here for Leenock to use an Imperial Age power spike, because sure, I think his eco was much weaker, but it's not like he's starved out on resources. In fact, he's got plenty of resources to burn. In the meantime, you see Mista, he actually has 1,700 food banged up even in that guild hall, and he's going to get to Imperial even without touching that. Now, one could wonder if he just forgot about it, or he just knew that, hey, I'm not going to be taking any engagements over here, I don't need to rush my Imperial, so I can afford to just keep that in there for a lot longer and, pop it out when I have 10,000 food in there, because that would be a massive power spike in the next, 10 minutes or so, let's say.
Now that, because I know my German really well, that is going to be a College of Artillery Lidakor. It's definitely not because I can tell the difference between blueprints. And that means that Mista's going to keep pretty premium units. So to your point around Leenock's power spike and opportunity to go, I actually think it's kind of past already. The fact that Mista is able to tech up while already being pop capped means you're past your pivot point. And Lankstack could still be a saving grace, but now instead of being oh, X has one up over Y, at this point, I think we're now reaching a point where it's just going to be more important than anything else how the micro in these battles goes. Because if Leenock is on point with the way he utilizes these Langstack, Mista's army is going to go bye-bye.
Indeed. With Mista reaching Imperial, though, he is going to get the upgrades in. One of the things that's concerning here right now for Leenock, I feel, is that he only has 11 Landsknechte. So you see, most of his army is Spearmen. Sure thing, they don't do terrible against the Crossbowmen or the Arbaletier, but it's not really a direct counter unit. And right now, I get the feel that Leenock's army isn't really population efficient over here. It just doesn't feel like a high-tier army right now, most of them being just Spearmen.
And in fairness, the Spears can be remarkable late game for the HRE. We have to remember that they do get the Riveted Chainmail, which gives an extra free armor. And then on top of that, they do have the March Drill. So overall, I don't think having Spears as your late game composites HRE is bad. But, considering you were able to tech up ahead, you should have maybe been looking for some sort of qualitative solution initially. Maybe a few bombards, maybe several knights, and find a way to breach in while Mista was sitting back not doing anything.
Yeah, Leenock is playing very defensive over here, and it's fine. You're up against the French, you still don't have all the walls up, so maybe he's a little concerned that Mista could push him with 30 knights. Remember, he didn't have a ton of vision on Mista's base, and Mista loves his timing pushes. When you see the HRE reaching Imperial, maybe you think, okay, the French is going to flood me with 50 knights in a second. Maybe he was a little panicked about that one, but now he sees the Arbaletier, and this should be the thing that pops him in and says, hey, wait a minute, I don't need the Spearmen over here. Those guys have the Gambesons, they do have a ton of melee armor, so my Spearmen, they won't work really well against them.
Even the Langsneck are going to struggle against that, right? A lot of that damage is going to be removed. I think it's probably up to 8 melee armor at this stage on... Oh, look, they're actually called the Arbaletiers. Oh, I'm impressed by that. The Germans saw the really fancy word, and they were like, we're not even going to try to reimagine this one. They just are what they are.
Which raises the question... Which raises the question whether the German version of the game still calls them Zhugenu for the Chinese, or they do have a different name there.
That's true. And I don't think the German people would step upon, another country's language like that. That's something that we Brits do. For example, did you know that the tikka masala is technically a national dish of the UK?
Whoa, I didn't know that.
See, it's if we saw these Arbaletiers, if it was up to us, we'd rename them. Actually, we wouldn't. We're obsessed with France, but that's besides the point. But if it was some other Zhugenu, we just call them Zhugi Nu. You have to really Brit it up because
you just call them
right.
Chukonu, no? That's the English transcription of it.
Zihuginu. There you go. That's probably. I imagine that is how like some Brit somewhere has announced it. Sorry for my people.
All right,
Okay,
back to the
let's focus
game.
on what's happened here.
Yep.
Yeah, because there is some breach out attempts by Leenock, but he's not really gaining much ground right now. And it's because he has to waste so much time going for these outposts. It's slowing down his process, and I think it's allowing Mista to bulk up. And with that bulk up, look what he's now doing. He's not only prepping Royal Culverins, he's also prepping the Royal Ranged unit here. The hand cannoneers are starting to stack up for the French.
Not something that you see every day from the French, simply because the arbaletiers are so effective and, you know, they're much cheaper than the hand cannoneers. But when it comes to population efficiency, that's going to be a great solution to deal with Leenock's army, because Leenock's army is still almost exclusively spearmen, and those get wiped out very easily by the hand cannoneers. By the way, that castle, being under fire by a trebuchet, got damaged a tiny bit, but I think you can emergency repair it if you really need to. It does have a relic inside, so it's a very strong defensive emplacement or position for Leenock to hold. That's why Mista is trying to crawl in on the right side with some towers, and honestly, if Mista wants to What? Do you see what I see? I'll go back to that tower court. Like, we need to see that again. Did you see that?
No, the town near the keep. The town near the keep you're talking about, right?
Middle.
No, to the left,
No, the tower. Down.
Yep.
Oh, it's gone. It's gone. Oh, that worked for nothing.
Cool. Oh, Tito. We gotta start learning how. We just gotta start learning how to say like down, left, and everything in German, and then like it'll process quicker.
Links,
right,
rechts. That's left and right. I don't know, up and down.
It's called?
Yeah.
Links. Oh, links, rechts. Okay, there you go. Links. You're wrong. Oh, rechts. What is this stream turning into? He's so confused right now. Round of applause for our boy Core coming in on his debut Observer Day, and he gets me of all people. Oh, God. And you know what? Leenock trying to make it nice and deep here. Have a good time here in June. And out of all the people we can go up against, it has to be Mista, who is going to be a pain in the arse. And you can see he's starting to get through this forward base, but Mista still has so much of the map behind him that he can fall back upon. And while he does guard this land, keep in mind that Mista will start to take away all the resources. And when you do approach that 40, 50, 60-minute mark, you know, that's when it turns into the resource drain. That's when it's a case usually of who got more of the map versus who necessarily played one fight better.
Yeah, indeed. You see, Mista still hasn't picked up the relic out there, and as both players are setting up for late game, those factors will actually become more and more impactful. I would love to see that guild hold, though, because Mista suddenly has 3,000 food in the bank, and I wonder if he pulled it off, or he still has a ton of food in there, because that could be an interesting factor to look at. 5,500. He needs to do something with it, because now you gotta switch into gold or stone or anything that's not food, really, because you have a good farming eco. You're floating 4,000 food and you have 5,000 else in there. You gotta wonder if Mista actually forget about it now.
It wouldn't be the first time we've wondered if Mista forgot about something. First it was Wheelbarrow, but you know, I think the difference between forgetting Wheelbarrow and forgetting Guildhall is that can be a good thing. When you think you're out and you're really screwed, you just look, you're like, oh, that's a lot of resource. Let me just click the button. Like, it could be a nice detail for him, because he could even think about throwing archers in the mixer just to counter out the spears, knowing that it will force Leenock to go into man-at-arms, but then it enables his arbaletiers again, right? It's kind of an interesting dynamic to think about, especially considering that although Leenock has a few mangonels, as more of these culverins start to come out, keeping those mangonels in the field becomes almost impossible, because in this matchup, one side has the royal variety of culverins and the other has the normie ones, which makes sense that logically, like with equal good micro, it should be Mista coming out ahead on those trades.
Yeah, and one of the things that goes underappreciated when it comes to the royal siege weapons, not just the culverins, but the bombards as well, is that they're buffed up versions of the original ones. Looks like we do have a bit of an engagement over here. Oh, that's actually a really good wraparound by Leenock. He's going to get very good value here for the spearman. All the siege is gone, so as much as I was hyping up the royal version of the culverin, well, they're mostly gone.
I love it when we have to define that as a really good wraparound, and not just the fact that culverins can't run away. Like, did you see their attempt at a retreat? Oh god, they're coming. It's like watching an old lady with a Zimmer frame run away from a T-Rex. You just know it's not going to end well.
At least you tried, right? Like, you gotta try it. But yeah, like those Culverins, as you pointed out, they are the royal version, so they're buffed up. It's in many ways it's actually comparable to the clock tower mechanics of the Chinese. It's a buffed up version. It's not just the fact that you can make Culverin as the French, it's also the fact that it's a better version of the Culverin. And now you see Mista, he's got a ton of food out there. He's going to turn that all into horsemen. He pulled off the food. You can see he's sitting on 6,000, still limited on wood, but he just turned all of his food bank into horsemen. He's up to 60.
That's some funky witchcraft right there, and a very like I think there's some witchcraft involved. Maybe he's trying to entrance Leenock because I can't necessarily say it's usually a great idea to mass horsemen against spearmen. Now I am just a simple pleb, but if I'm not mistaken, I do think that spearmen counter horsemen. No,
it's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it works out because there could be one thing that Mista is thinking about. Like remember a previous game. When he felt like he's in trouble, landmark snipe. But I feel like the single worst civilization to try and landmark snipe is HRE. Like, that should never work.
That's what I was facepalming about. It's like, I knew you were going to say it. And I'd already thought about it. I was like, there's no way you do it. Like, that button right there. Wait, what? Can we just get the not full? I only got the first part of emergency repairs. Can you teach this word to me, Cool? I need it.
Okay. It's time to learn how emergency repairs. Okay. I want an Englishman to pronounce it first, okay?
It literally says not full at the start, so you already know that I'm going to butcher this. Go back to it for a sec, Core, because I didn't get the second part. I think it was not full reparatur? He won't go back to it now, because he wants to watch this rush. It is an important rush, although it won't be a very effective one.
So you're saying not
full reparaturen. There you go.
It should be notfa reparaturen, right?
Yeah. I Britified that at the end.
Yeah.
I know I ruined it.
All right, let's see this because that is definitely the plan here. Killing villagers doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense because HRE can recover very fast. Obviously, it could work, but you get the impression that this is gonna be a landmark snipe because he's detaching some cavalry for the Schwabia. He is coming in.
The problem is the emergency repair is going to slow this down. Wraps around the villages though, Mista!
Where did they come from?
This is going to be tight. This is going to be tighter than it has any place being. They're done farming in the farmlands. They're here to farm wins for the farmer himself. He repairs, but it's not good enough. One goes down. He pulls his own villages. He needs to block this off. He needs to stop a route from being
he can do it.
Pass the Swabi in the meantime is going to go down. That's 2 landmarks already. Trying to repair it up, and this is the stakey move. Leenock is trying to get a new landmark up.
He can get
the
this.
Others go down.
He can get this. Ragnar's almost on fire. Oh, he's gonna get the Archon Chapel back.
No, the Archon Chapel's going back up. It's gonna be a fail. Mista. This is gonna be tight. I don't think he has enough horsemen anymore. He's lost a lot of cooldown already.
I mean, he's got 67 horsemen still. The town center is on fire though. You haven't destroyed the town center yet. No, it's not gonna happen.
He doesn't have enough. He doesn't have enough anymore. The spearmen are back. They've had enough of this shenanigan from Mista. Everything is going to be dead. His pop cap's going to be racing all the way to 0. He tries to pull additional horsemen, but it's just not cutting anymore. There's too many villagers tapping their little hammers, and it looks like there's going to be a stabilization out of Leenock after losing 2 of the landmarks.
And we talked about this one. Against emergency repairs is difficult, and Leenock sees that this is an all-in, so he's committing like 50 villagers to repair that town center. Mista tried it, and he's going to tap out of this game with 5,000 gold in the bank. He felt like he just can't win a long game over here, or he doesn't want to play a long game. Went for the landmark snipe, did not come through, and with that, Leenock moves into the semifinals of the second weekly event of Road to Red Bull Wololo.
Mista, we had such high hopes for him. There are high promises given over. We thought he was going to make it deep. He was meant to be our savior, but he woke up today, he got on his PC, and you know, quite often when he's out farming, he's thinking about playing Age of Empires. Pesty told us that. But in this situation, when he was getting ready to play Age of Empires, I'm wondering if he looked outside and the weather was sunny, and all he could think about was farming, because this felt like someone rushing to get the day done with.